Hello. Good evening, everybody. Hello, Rainiacs. How are we doing tonight? What'd you think of my new starting screen? I sound a bit quiet. Hello, Rainiacs. How are we doing tonight? Let's change that. Okay, how's this now? Is this a little better? Excellent. Yeah, I spent about a couple hours today tooling around with OBS to try to figure out how to punch up the production value of this a little bit. So here we are. I have a starting screen and I'm streaming on through OBS. So maybe there's hope for me yet to be a proper gamer, a proper streamer. All right. So we're picking up where we left off yesterday. More horse and the and his boy. Um, so let's just get right into it. Chapter 4. Shasta falls in with the Narnians. At first, Shasta could see nothing in the valley below. Below him but a sea of mist with a few domes and pinnacles rising from it. But as the light increased and the mist cleared away, he saw more and more. A broad river divided itself into two streams, and on the island between them stood the city of Tashbaan, one of the wonders of the world. Round the very edge of the island, so that the water lapped against the stone, ran high walls strengthened with so many towers that he soon gave up trying to count them. Inside the walls the island rose in a hill, and every bit of that hill, up to the Tisrock's palace, and the great temple of Tash at the top, was completely covered with buildings, terrace above terrace, street above street, zigzag roads or huge flights of steps, bordered with orange trees and lemon trees, roof gardens, balconies, deep archways, pillared colonnades, spires, battlements, minarets, pinnacles, and when at last the sun rose out of the sea, and the great silver-plated dome of the temple flashed back its light, he was almost dazzled. "Get on, Shasta," Bree kept saying. The river banks on each side of the valley was such a mass of gardens that they looked at first like forest, until you got closer and saw the white walls of innumerable houses peeping out from beneath the trees. Soon after that Shasta noticed a delicious smell of flowers and fruit. About 15 minutes later they were down among them, plodding on a level road with white walls on each side and trees bending over the walls. "I say," said Shasta in an old voice, "this is a wonderful place." "I dare say," said Bree, "but I wish we were safely through it and out at the other side. Narnia in the north." At that moment a low throbbing noise began, which gradually swelled louder and louder till the whole valley seemed to be swaying with it. It was a musical noise, but so strong and solemn as to be a little frightening. Here's the illustration. "That's the horns blowing for the city gates to be open," said Bree. We shall be there in a minute. Now, Aravis, do droop your shoulders a bit and step heavier and try to look less like a princess. Try to imagine you've been kicked and cuffed and called names all your life. If it comes to that, said Aravis, what about you drooping your head a bit more and arching your neck a bit less and trying to look less like a warhorse? Hush, said Bree. Here we are. And they were. They had come to the river's edge, and the road ahead of them ran along a many-arched bridge. The water danced brightly in the early sunlight. Away to their right, nearer the river's mouth, they caught a glimpse of ships' masts. Several other travelers were before them on the bridge, mostly peasants driving laden donkeys and mules, or carrying baskets on their heads. The children and the horses joined the crowd. Is anything wrong? Whispered Shasta to Aravis, who had an odd look on her face. Oh, it's all very well for you, whispered Aravis rather savagely. What do you care about Tashbaan? But I ought to be riding in on a litter with soldiers before me and slaves behind, and perhaps going to a great feast in the Tisrock's palace, may he live forever. Not sneaking in like this. It's different for you. Shasta thought all this very silly. At the far end of the bridge the walls of the city towered high above them, and the brazen gates stood open in the gateway, which was really wide but looked narrow because it was so high. Half a dozen soldiers, leaning on their spears, stood on each side. Aravis couldn't help thinking, they'd all jump to attention and salute me if they knew whose daughter I am. But the others were only thinking of how they'd get through and hoping the soldiers would not ask any questions. Fortunately, they did not. But one of them picked a carrot out of a peasant's basket and threw it at Shasta with a rough laugh, saying, "Hey, horse boy, you'll catch it if your master finds you've been using his saddle horse for pack work." This frightened him badly, for of course it showed that no one who knew anything about horses would mistake Brie for anything but a charger. "It's my master's orders, so there!" said Shasta, but it would have been better if he had held his tongue, for the soldier gave him a box on the side of his face that nearly knocked him down, and said, "Take that, you young filth, to teach you how to talk to freemen." But they all slunk into the city without being stopped. Shasta cried only a very little. He was used to hard knocks. Inside the gates, Tashbaan did not at first seem so splendid as it had looked from a distance. The first street was narrow, and there were hardly any windows in the walls on each side. It was much more crowded than Shasta had expected, crowded partly by the peasants on their way to market, who had come in with them, but also with water sellers, sweetmeat sellers, porters, soldiers, beggars, ragged children, hens, stray dogs, and barefooted slaves. What you would chiefly have noticed if you had been there was the smells, which came from unwashed people, unwashed dogs, scent, garlic, onions, and the piles of refuse which lay everywhere. Shasta was pretending to lead, but it was really Brie, who knew the way and kept guiding him by little nudges with his nose. They soon turned to the left and began going up a steep hill. It was much fresher and pleasanter, for the road was bordered by trees and there were houses only on the right side. On the other they looked out over the roofs of houses in the lower town and could see some way up the river. Then they went round a hairpin bend to their right and continued rising. They were zigzagging up to the center of Tashbaan. Soon they came to finer streets. Great statues of the gods and heroes of Kalaman, who were mostly impressive rather than agreeable to look at, rose on shining pedestals. Palm trees and pillared arcades cast shadows over the burning pavements, and through the arched gateways of many a palace Shasta caught sight of green branches, cool fountains, and smooth lawns. It must be nice inside, he thought. At every turn, Shasta hoped they were getting out of the crowd, but they never did. This made their progress very slow, and every now and then they had to stop altogether. This usually happened because a loud voice shouted out, "Way, way for the Tarkan," or "For the Tarkina," or "For the 15th Vizier," or "For the Ambassador," and everyone in the crowd would crush back against the walls, and above their heads Shasta would sometimes see the great lord or lady for whom all the fuss was being made, lolling upon a litter which 4 or 5 or even 6 gigantic slaves carried upon their bare shoulders. For in Tashbaan there is only one traffic regulation, which is that everyone who is less important has to get out of the way for everyone who is more important, unless you want a cut from a whip, or a punch from the butt end of a spear. It was in a splendid street very near the top of the city, the Tisrock's palace was the only thing above it, that the most disastrous of these stoppages occurred. "Way, way, way," came the voice. "Way for the white barbarian king, the guest of the Tisrock, may he live forever. Way for the Narnian lords." Shasta tried to get out of the way, and to make Bree go back, but no horse, not even a talking horse from Narnia, backs easily, and a woman with a very edgy basket in her hands, who was just behind Shasta, pushed the basket hard against his shoulders, and said, "Now then, who are you shoving?" And then someone else jostled him from the side, and in the confusion of the moment he lost hold of Bree, and then the whole crowd behind him became so stiffened and packed tight that he couldn't move at all. So he found himself, unintentionally, in the first row, and had a fine sight of the party that was coming down the street. It was quite unlike any other party they had seen that day. The crier who went in before it shouting, "Way, way," was the only Calamine in it, and there was no litter. Everyone was on foot. There were about half a dozen men, and Shasta had never seen anyone like them before. For one thing, they were all as fair-skinned as himself, and most of them had fair hair. And they were not dressed like men of Calamin. Most of them had legs bare to the knee. Their tunics were of fine bright hardy colors, woodland green or gay yellow or fresh blue. Instead of turbans they wore steel or silver caps, some of them set with jewels, and one with little wings on each side of it. A few were bareheaded. The swords at their side were long and straight, not curved like Calamine's scimitars. And instead of being grave and mysterious like most Calamines, they walked with a swing and let their arms and shoulders go free, and chatted and laughed. One was whistling. You could see that they were ready to be friends with anyone who was friendly, and didn't give a fig for anyone who wasn't. Shasta thought he had never seen anything so lovely in his life. But there was no time to enjoy it, for at once a really dreadful thing happened. The leader of the fair-headed men suddenly pointed at Shasta, cried out, "There he is! There's our runaway!" and seized him by the shoulder. Next minute he gave Shasta a smack, not a cruel one to make you cry, but a sharp one to let you know you're a disgrace, and added, shaking him, "Shame on you, my lord! Fie for shame! Queen Susan's eyes are red with weeping because of you. What! Truant for a whole night? Where have you been?" Shasta would have darted under Bree's body and tried to make himself scarce in the crowd, if he had had the least chance. But the fair-headed men were all round him by now, and he was held firm. Of course his first impulse was to say he was only poor Ashish, the fisherman's son, and that the foreign lord must have mistaken him for someone else. But then the very last thing he wanted to do in that crowded place was to start explaining who he was and what he was doing. If he started on that, he would soon be asked where he had got his horse from, and who Aravis was, and then good-bye to any chance of getting through Tashbaan. His next impulse was to look at Bree for help, but Bree had no intention of letting all that crowd know he could talk, and stood looking just as stupid as a horse can. As for Aravis, Shasta did not even dare to look at her for fear of drawing attention, and there was no time to think, for the leader of the Narnians,
said at once, "Take one of his little lordship's hands, Peregrine, of your courtesy, and I'll take the other. And now, on. Our royal sister's mind will be greatly eased when she sees our young scapegoat safe in our lodging."
And so, before they were halfway through Tashbaan, all their plans were ruined, and without even a chance to say goodbye to the others, Shasta found himself being marched off among strangers, and quite unable to guess what might be going to happen next. The Narnian king, for Shasta began to see by the way the rest spoke to him that he must be a king, kept on asking him questions, where he had been, how he had got out, what he had done with his clothes, and didn't he know that he had been very naughty, only the king called it naught instead of naughty, and Shasta said nothing in answer because he couldn't think of anything to say that would not be dangerous.
"What, oh, mum?" asked the king. "I must plainly tell you, prince, that this hangdog silence becomes one of your blood even less than escape itself. To run away might pass for a boy's frolic with some spirit in it, but the king's son of Archenland should avouch his deed, not hang his head like a Calamine slave."
This was very unpleasant, for Shasta felt all the time that this young king was the very nicest of grown-ups and would have liked to have made a good impression on him. The strangers led him, held tightly by both hands, along a narrow street and down a flight of shallow stairs, and then up another to a wide doorway in a white wall with two tall dark cypress trees, one on each side of it. Once through the arch, Shasta found himself in a courtyard which was also a garden. A marble basin of clear water in the center was kept continually rippling by the fountain that fell into it. Orange trees grew round it out of the smooth grass, and the four white walls which surrounded the lawn were covered with climbing roses. The noise and dust and crowding of the streets seemed suddenly far away. He was led rapidly across the garden and then into a dark doorway. The crier remained outside. After that they took him along a corridor, where the stone floor felt beautifully cool to his hot feet, and up some stairs. A moment later he found himself blinking in the light of a big airy room with wide open windows, all looking north so that no sun came in. There was a carpet on the floor more wonderfully colored than anything he had ever seen, and his feet sank down into it as if he were treading in thick moss. All round the walls there were low sofas with rich cushions on them, and the room seemed to be full of people. Very queer people, some of them, thought Shasta. One moment, I need some water. I'll be right back. All round the walls there were low sofas with rich cushions on them, and the room seemed to be full of people. Very queer people, some of them, thought Shasta. One moment, I need some water. I'll be right back. Thank you for waiting. But he had no time to think of that before the most beautiful lady he had ever seen rose from her palace and threw her arms round him and kissed him, saying, "Oh, Corin, Corin, how could you? And thou and I such close friends ever since thy mother died. And what should I have said to thy royal father if I came home without thee? would have been a cause almost of war between Archenland and Narnia, which are friends time out of mind. It was not, playmate, very naught of thee to use us so. Apparently, thought Shasta to himself, I'm being mistaken for a prince of Archenland, wherever that is, and these must be the Narnians. I wonder where the real Corin is. But these thoughts did not help him to say anything out loud. "Where hast been, Corin?" said the lady, her hands still on Shasta's shoulders. "I I don't know," stammered Shasta.
There it is, Susan, said the king. I could get no tale out of him, true or false. Your Majesties, Queen Susan, King Edmund,
said a voice, and when Shasta turned to look at the speaker, he nearly jumped out of his skin with surprise. For this was one of those queer people whom he had noticed out of the corner of his eye when he first came into the room. He was about the same height as Shasta himself. From the waist upwards he was like a man, but his legs were hairy like a goat's, and shaped like a goat's, and he had goat's hooves and a tail. His skin was rather red, and he had curly hair, and a short pointed beard and two little horns. He was in fact a faun, which is a creature Shasta had never seen a picture of or even heard of. And if you've read a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you may like to know that this was the very same faun, Tumnus by name, whom Susan's sister Lucy had met on the very first day when she found her way into Narnia. But he was a good deal older now, for by this time Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy had been kings and queens of Narnia for several years. Image of
Your Majesties, he was saying, His little Highness has had a touch of the sun. Look at him. He is dazed. He does not know where he is.
Then of course everyone stopped scolding Shasta and asked him questions, and he was made much of and laid on a sofa, and cushions were put under his head, and he was given an iced sherbet in a golden cup to drink, and told to keep very quiet. Nothing like this had ever happened to Shasta in his life before. He had never even imagined lying on anything so comfortable as that sofa or drinking anything so delicious as that sherbet. He was still wondering what had happened to the others, and how on earth he was going to escape and meet them at the tombs, and what would happen when the real Corin turned up again. But none of these worries seemed so pressing now that he was comfortable, and perhaps, later on, there would be nice things to eat. Meanwhile, the people in that cool airy room were very interesting. Besides the faun, there were two dwarfs, a kind of creature he had never seen before, and a very large raven. The rest were all humans, grown-ups but young, and all of them, both men and women, had nicer faces and voices than most Calamines. And soon Shasta found himself taking an interest in the conversation. Now, madam, the king was saying to Queen Susan, the lady who had kissed Shasta,
What think you? We have been in this city fully 3 weeks. Have you yet settled in your mind whether you will marry this dark-faced lover of yours, this Prince Rabadash, or no?
the lady shook her head. No, brother, she said, not for all the jewels in Tashbaan. Hullo, thought Shasta. Although they're king and queen, they're brother and sister, not married to one another.
Truly, sister, said the king, I should have loved you the less if you had taken him. And I tell you that at the first coming of the Tisrock's ambassadors into Narnia to treat of this marriage, and later when the prince was our guest at Cair Paravel, it was a wonder to me that ever you could find it in your heart to show him so much favour.
That was my folly, Edmund, said Queen Susan, of which I cry you mercy. Yet when he was with us in Narnia, truly this prince bore himself in another fashion than he does now in Tashbaan. For I take you all to witness what marvelous feats he did in that great tournament, and hastily with which our brother the High King made for him, and how meekly and courteously he consorted with us the space of 7 days. But here, in his own city, he has shown another face.
Ah, croaked the raven, it is an old saying. See the bear in his own den before you judge of his conditions. That's very true, Salopad, said one of the dwarfs. And another is, come, live with me, and you'll know me. Yes, said the king. We have now seen him for what he is. That is a most proud, bloody, luxurious, cruel, and self-pleasing tyrant.
Then in the name of Aslan, said Susan, let us leave Tashbaan this very day.
There's the rub, sister, said Edmund. For now I must open to you all that has been growing in my mind these last 2 days and more. Paradin, of your courtesy, look to the door and see that there is no spy upon us. All well? So, for now, we must be secret.
Everyone had begun to look very serious. Queen Susan jumped up and ran to her brother. "Oh, Edmund!" she cried. "What is it? There is something dreadful in your face." Chapter 5. Prince Corin.
My dear sister, and very good lady, said King Edmund, you must now show your courage, for I tell you plainly, we are in no small danger.
"What is it, Edmund?" asked the Queen.
It is this.
Said Edmund.
I do not think we shall find it easy to leave Tashbaan. While the prince had hoped that you would take him, we were honored guests, but by the lion's mane, I think that as soon as he has your flat denial, we shall be no better than prisoners. One of the dwarfs gave a low whistle. I warned your majesties, I warned you, said Salopad the raven. Easily in, but not easily out, as the lobster said in the lobster pot. I have been with the prince this morning, continued Edmund. He is little used, more's the pity, to having his will crossed, and he is very chafed at your long delays and doubtful answers. This morning he pressed very hard to know your mind. I put it aside, meaning at the same time to diminish his hopes, with some light common jest about women's fancies, and hinted that his suit was likely to be cold. He grew angry and dangerous. There was a sort of threatening, though still veiled under a show of courtesy, in every word he spoke. Yes, said Tumnus, and when I supped with the Grand Vizier last night it was the same. He asked me how I liked Tashbaan, and I, for I could not tell him I hated every stone of it and I would not lie, told him that now, when high summer was coming on, my heart turned to the cool woods and dewy slopes of Narnia. He gave a smile that meant no good, and said, there is nothing to hinder you from dancing there again, little Goatfoot, always provided you leave us in exchange a bride for our prince.
"Do you mean he would make me his wife by force?" exclaimed Susan.
That's my fear, Susan, said Edmund. Wife or slave, which is worse.
"But how can he? Does the Tisroc think our brother the High King would suffer such an outrage?"
Sire, said Paradin to the king, they would not be so mad. Do you think there are no swords and spears in Narnia? Alas, said Edmund, my guess is that the Tisroc has very small fear of Narnia. We are a little land, and little lands on the borders of a great empire were always hateful to the lords of the great empire. He longs to blot them out, gobble them up. When first he suffered the prince to come to Cair Paravel as your lover, sister, it may be that he was only seeking an occasion against us. Most likely he hopes to make one mouthful of Narnia and Archenland both. Let him try, said the second dwarf. At sea we are as big as he is, and if he assaults us by land, he has the desert to cross.
True, friend, said Edmund, but is the desert a sure defense? What does Salopad say?
I know that desert well, said the raven, for I have flown above it far and wide in my younger days.
You may be sure that Shasta pricked up his ears at this point.
And this is certain, that if Tisroc goes by the great oasis, he can never lead a great army across into Auckland. For though they could reach the oasis by the end of their first day's march, at the springs there would be too little for the thirst of all those soldiers and their beasts. But there is another way.
Shasta listened more attentively still.
He that would find that way, said the raven, must start from the tombs of the ancient kings, and ride northwest so that the double peak of Mount Fire is always straight ahead of him. And so, in a day's riding, or a little more, he shall come to the head of a stony valley, which is so narrow that a man might be within a furlong of it 1,000 times, and never know it was there. And looking down this valley, he will see neither grass, nor water, nor anything else good. But if he rides on down it, he will come to a river, and can ride by that water all the way into Auckland.
And do the Calamines know of this western way? asked the queen. Friends, friends, said Edmund, what is the use of all this discourse? We are not asking whether Narnia or Calamin would win if war arose between them. We are asking how to save the honor of the queen and our own lives out of this devilish city. For though my brother Peter the High King defeated the Tisroc 12 times over, yet long before that day our throats would be cut, and the Queen's Grace would be the wife, or more likely, the slave of this prince.
We have our weapons, king, said the first dwarf, and this is a reasonably defensible house.
And to that, said the king, I do not doubt that every one of us would sell our lives dearly in the gate, and they would not come at the Queen but over our dead bodies. Yet we should be merely rats fighting in a trap when all's said.
Very true,
Croaked the raven.
these last stands in a house make good stories, but nothing ever good came of them. After their first few repulses, the enemy always sets the house on fire.
I am the cause of all this, said Susan, bursting into tears. Oh, if only I had never left Cair Paravel! Our last happy day was before those ambassadors came from Kellerman. The mowers were planting an orchard for us. Oh, oh! And she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Courage, Sue, courage, said Edmund. Remember, but what is the matter with you, Mr. Tumnus? For the fawn was holding both his horns with his hands, as if he were trying to keep his head on by them, and writhing to and fro as if he had a pain in his inside. Don't speak to me, don't speak to me, said Tumnus. I'm thinking. I'm thinking so that I can hardly breathe. Wait, wait, do wait. There was a moment's puzzled silence, and then the fawn looked up, drew a long breath, mopped its forehead, and said, the only difficulty is how to get down to our ship, with some stores too, without being seen and stopped.
Yes, said a dwarf dryly, just as the beggar's only difficulty about riding is that he has no horse.
Wait, wait, said Mr. Tumnus impatiently. All we need is some pretext for going down to our ship today and taking stuff on board.
Yes,
said King Edmund doubtfully. Well then, said the fawn, how would it be if your majesties bade the prince to a great banquet, to be held on board our own galleon, the Splendor Highline, tomorrow night, and let the message be worded as graciously as the queen can contrive without pledging her honor, so as to give the prince a hope that she is weakening.
This is very good counsel, sire, croaked the raven. And then, continued Tumnus excitedly, everyone will expect us to be going down to the ship all day, making preparations for our guests. And let some of us go to the bazaars and spend every minim we have at the fruitiers and sweetmeat sellers and the wine merchants, just as we were if we were really giving a feast. And let us order magicians and jugglers and dancing girls and flute players all to be on board tomorrow night. I see, said King Edmund, rubbing his hands. And then, said Mr. Tumnus, we'll all be on board tonight, and as soon as it is quite dark, up sail and out oars, said the king. And so to sea, cried Tumnus, leaping up and beginning to dance. And our nose northward, said the first dwarf, running for home. Hurrah for Narnia and the north, said the other. And the prince waking next morning and finding his birds flown, said Peregrine, clapping his hands. "Oh, Master Tumnus, dear Master Tumnus," said the queen, catching his hands and swinging with him as he danced, "you have saved us all." "The prince will chase us," said another lord, whose name Shasta had not heard. "That's the last of my fears," said Edmund. "I have seen all the shipping in the river, and there's no tall ship of war nor swift galley there. I wish he may chase us, for the Splendor High Line could sink anything he has to send after her, if we were overtaken at all." And here's the celebratory dance at Mr. Tumnus's bold escape plan. "Sire," said the raven, "you shall hear no better plot than the fawn's, though we sat in council for 7 days. And now, as we birds say, nests before eggs, which is as much as to say, let us all take our food and then at once be about our business." Every one arose at this, and the doors were opened, and the lords and the creatures stood aside for the king and the queen to go first. Shasta wondered what he ought to do, but Mr. Tumnus said, "Lie there, your highness, and I will bring you up a little feast to yourself in a few moments. There is no need for you to move until we are all ready to embark." Shasta laid his head down again on the pillows, and soon he was alone in the room. "This is perfectly dreadful," thought Shasta. It never came into his head to tell these Narnians the whole truth and ask for their help. Having been brought up by a hard, close-fisted man like Ashish, he had a fixed habit of never telling grown-ups anything if he could help it. He thought that they would always spoil or stop whatever you were trying to do. And he thought that even if the Narnian king might be friendly to the two horses because they were talking beasts of Narnia, he would hate Aravis because she was a Calamine, and either sell her for slave or send her back to father. As for himself, "I simply daren't tell them I'm not Prince Corin now," thought Shasta. "I've heard all their plans. If they knew I wasn't one of themselves, they'd never let me out of this house alive. They'd be afraid I betrayed them to the Tisroc. They'd kill me. And if the real Corin turns up, it'll all come out and they will kill me." He had, you see, no idea of how noble and free-born people behave. "What am I to do? What am I to do?" he kept saying to himself. "What? Hullo, here comes that goatee little creature again." The fawn trotted in, half dancing, with a tray in its hands, which was nearly as large as itself. This he set on an inlaid table beside Shasta's sofa, and sat down himself on the carpeted floor with his goatee legs crossed. "Now, Princeling," he said, "make a good dinner. It will be your last meal in Tashbaan." It was a fine meal after the Calamine fashion. I don't know whether you would have liked it or not, but Shasta did. There were lobsters and salad and snipe, stuffed with almonds and truffles, and a complicated dish made of chicken liver and rice, and raisins and nuts, and there were cool melons and gooseberry fools and mulberry fools, and every kind of nice thing that can be made with ice. There was also a little flagon of the sort of wine that is called white, though it is really yellow. Here's the spread. I don't know about you, but I would certainly devour lobster in a heartbeat, though I'm not certain about the rice and raisins and nuts in the same dish. While Shasta was eating, the good little fawn, who thought he was still dazed with sunstroke, kept talking to him about the fine times he would have when they all got home, about his good old father, King Loon of Archenland, and the little castle where he lived on the southern slopes of the pass. "And don't forget," said Mr. Tumnus, "that you are promised your first suit of armor and your first war horse on your next birthday, and then your highness will begin to learn how to tilt and joust, and in a few years, if all goes well, King Peter has promised your royal father that he himself will make you knight at Cair Paravel, and in the meantime there will be plenty of comings and goings between Narnia and Archenland across the neck of the mountains. And of course, you remember you have promised to come for a whole week to stay with me for the summer festival, and there'll be bonfires and all-night dances of fauns and dryads in the heart of the woods, and who knows, we might see Aslan himself." When the meal was over, the fawn told Shasta to stay quietly where he was. "And it wouldn't do you any harm to have a little sleep," he added. "I'll call you in the plenty of time to get on board. And then home. Narnia and north." Shasta had so enjoyed his dinner and all the things Tumnus had been telling him that when he was left alone his thoughts took a different turn. He only hoped now that the real Prince Corin would not turn up until it was too late, and that he would be taken away to Narnia by ship. I'm afraid he did not think at all of what might happen to the real Corin when he was left behind in Tashbaan. He was a little worried about Aravis and Bree waiting for him at the tombs, but then he said to himself, "Well, how can I help it? And anyway, that Aravis thinks she's too good to go about with me, so she can jolly well go alone." And at the same time, he couldn't help feeling it would be much nicer going to Narnia by sea than toiling across the desert. When he had thought all this, he did what I expect you would have done if you had been up very early and had a long walk and a great deal of excitement and then a very good meal and were lying on a sofa in a cool room with no noise in it except when a bee came buzzing in through the wide open windows. He fell asleep. What woke him was a loud crash. He jumped up off the sofa, staring. He saw at once, from the mere look of the room, the lights and shadows all looked different, that he must have slept for several hours. He saw also what made the crash. A costly porcelain vase, which had been standing on the window sill, lay on the floor, broken into about 30 pieces. But he hardly noticed all these things. Here's the drawing before I turn the page. What he did notice was two hands gripping the window sill from outside. They gripped harder and harder, getting white at the knuckles, and then up came a head and a pair of shoulders. A moment later there was a boy of Shasta's own age sitting astride of the sill with one leg hanging down inside the room. Shasta had never seen his own face in a looking glass. Even if he had, he might not have realized that the other boy was, at ordinary times, almost exactly like himself. At, at the moment, this boy was not particularly like anyone, for he had the finest black eye you ever saw, and a tooth missing, and his clothes, which must have been splendid clothes when he put them on, were torn and dirty, and there was both blood and mud on his face. "Who are you?" said the boy in a whisper. "Are you Prince Corin?" asked Shasta. "Yes, of course," said the other. "But who are you?" "I'm nobody. Nobody in particular, I mean," said Shasta.
King Edmund caught me in the street and mistook me for you. I suppose we must look like one and another. Can I get out the way you've got in?
Yes, if you're any good at climbing, said Corin. But why are you in such a hurry? I say, we ought to be able to get some fun out of this being mistaken for one another.
No, no, said Shasta. We must change places at once. It'll be simply frightful if Mr. Tumnus comes back and finds us both here. I've had to pretend to be you, and you're starting tonight secretly. And where were you all this time?
A boy in the street made a beastly joke about Queen Susan, said Prince Corin, so I knocked him down. He ran howling into a house, and his big brother came out, so I knocked the big brother down. Then they all followed me until we ran into three old men with spears who were called the Watch. So I fought with the Watch, and they knocked me down. It was getting dark by now. Then the Watch took me along to lock me up somewhere. So I'd asked them if they'd like a stop of wine, and they said they didn't mind if they did. Then I took them to a wine shop, got them some, and they all sat down and drank till they fell asleep. I thought it was time for me to be off. So I came out quietly, and then I found the first boy, the one who had started all the trouble, still hanging about. So I knocked him down again. After that, I climbed up a pipe onto the roof of a house and lay quiet till it began to get light this morning. Ever since that, I've been finding my way back. I say, is there anything to drink?
No, I drank it, said Shasta. And now show me how you got in. There's not a minute to lose. You better lie down on the sofa and pretend. But I forgot. You'll be no good with all those bruises and that black eye. You'll just have to tell them the truth once I'm safely away.
What else did you think I'd be telling them? Asked the prince with a rather angry look. And who are you?
There's no time, said Shasta in a frantic whisper. I'm a Narnian, I believe. Something northern, anyway. But I've been brought up all my life in Kalaman, and I'm escaping across the desert with a talking horse called Bree. Now quick, how do I get away?
Look, said Corin. Drop from this window onto the roof of the veranda. But you must do it lightly, on your toes, or someone will hear you. Then along to your left, and you can get up to the top of that wall if you're any good at all as a climber. Then along the wall to the corner, drop onto the rubbish heap you'll find outside, and there you are.
Thanks, said Shasta, who was already sitting on the sill. The two boys were looking into each other's faces and suddenly found that they were friends.
Goodbye, said Corin, and good luck. I do hope you get safe away.
Goodbye, said Shasta. I say, you have been having some adventures.
Nothing to yours, said the prince. Now drop. Lightly, I say, he added as Shasta dropped. I hope we meet in Archenland. Go to my father, King Loon. Tell him you're a friend of mine. Look out, I hear someone coming.
Chapter 6 Shasta Among the Tombs. Shasta ran lightly along the roof on tiptoes. It felt hot to his bare feet. He was only a few seconds scrambling up the wall at the far end, and when he got to the corner he felt himself looking down into a narrow, smelly street, and there was a rubbish heap against the outside of the wall, just as Corin had told him. Before jumping down, he took a rapid glance round him to get his bearings. Apparently he had now come over the crown of the island hill on which Tashbaan is built. Everything sloped away before him, flat roofs below flat roofs, down to the towers and the battlements of the city's northern wall. Beyond that was the river, and beyond the river a short slope covered with gardens. But beyond that again there was something he had never seen the like of. A great yellowish-gray thing, flat as a calm sea and stretching for miles. On the far side of it were huge blue things, lumpy but with jagged edges, and some of them with white tops. The desert, the mountains, thought Shasta. He jumped down onto the rubbish and began trotting along downhill as fast as he could in the narrow lane, which soon brought him into a wider street where there were more people. No one bothered to look at a little ragged boy running along on bare feet. Still,
He was anxious and uneasy till he turned the corner and there saw the city gate in front of him. Here he was pressed and jostled a bit, for a good many other people were also going out, and on the bridge beyond the gate the crowd became quite a slow procession, more like a queue than a crowd. Out there, with clear running water on each side, it was deliciously fresh after the smell and heat and noise of Tashbaan. When once Shasta had reached the far end of the bridge, he found the crowd melting away. Everyone seemed to be going either to the left or the right along the river bank. He went straight ahead up a road that did not appear to be much used between gardens. In a few paces he was alone, and a few more brought him to the top of the slope. There he stood and stared. It was like coming to the end of the world, for all the grass stopped quite suddenly a few feet before him, and the sand began, endless level like sand on a seashore, but a bit rougher because it was never wet. The mountains, which now looked further off than before, loomed ahead. Greatly to his relief, he saw, about 5 minutes' walk away on his left, what must certainly be the tombs, just as Bree had described them. Great masses of mouldering stone, shaped like gigantic beehives, but a little narrower. They looked very black and grim, for the sun was now setting right behind them. He turned his face west, and trotted towards the tombs. He could not help looking out very hard for any signs of his friends, though the setting sun shone in his face so that he could hardly see anything. And anyway, he thought, of course they'll be round on the far side of the farthest tomb. Not this side where anyone might see them from the city. There were about 12 tombs, each with a low arched doorway that opened into absolute blackness. They were dotted about in no kind of order, so that it took a long time, going round this one and going round that one, before you could be sure that you had looked round every side of every tomb. This was what Shasta had to do. There was nobody there. It was very quiet here out on the edge of the desert, and now the sun had really set. Suddenly, from somewhere behind him, there came a terrible sound. But first, here's the illustration. Shasta looking out over the tombs. Shasta's heart gave a great jump, and he had to bite his tongue to keep himself from screaming. Next moment he realized what it was, the horns of Tashbaan blowing for the closing of the gates. "Don't be a silly little coward," said Shasta to himself. "Why, it's only the same noise you heard this morning." I do love the images too. It really helps contextualize it. But there is a great difference between a noise heard letting you in with your friends in the morning, and a noise heard alone at nightfall shutting you out. And now that the gates were shut, he knew there was no chance of the others joining him that evening. Either they're shut up in Tashbaan for the night, thought Shasta, or else they've gone without me. It's just the sort of thing that Aravis would do, but Bree wouldn't. Oh, he wouldn't. Oh, would he? In this idea about Aravis, Shasta was once more quite wrong. She was proud, and could be hard enough, but she was as true as steel and would never have deserted a companion, whether she liked him or not. Now that Shasta knew he would have to spend the night alone, it was getting darker every minute, he began to like the look of the place less and less. There was something very uncomfortable about those great silent shapes of stone. He had been trying his hardest for a long time not to think of ghouls, but he couldn't keep it up any longer. "Ow! Ow! Help!" he shouted suddenly, for at that very moment he felt something touch his leg. I don't think anyone can be blamed for shouting if something comes up from behind and touches him. Not in such a place and at such a time, when he is frightened already. Shasta at any rate was too frightened to run. Anything would be better than being chased round and round the burial places of the ancient kings, with something he dared not look at behind him. Instead, he did what was really the most sensible thing he could do. He looked round, and his heart almost burst with relief. What had touched him was only a cat. The light was too bad now for Shasta to see much of the cat except that it was big and very solemn. It looked as if it might have lived for long, long years among the tombs alone. Its eyes made you think it knew secrets it would not tell. "Puss, puss," said Shasta, "I suppose you're not a talking cat?" The cat only stared at him harder than ever. Then it started walking away, and of course Shasta followed it. It led him right through the tombs and out on the desert side of them. There it sat down bolt upright, with its tail curled around its feet, and its face set towards the desert and towards Narnia in the north, as still as if it were watching for some enemy. Shasta lay down beside it with his back against the cat, and his face towards the tombs, because if one is nervous, there's nothing like having your face towards the danger and having something warm and solid at your back. The sand wouldn't have seemed very comfortable to you, but Shasta had been sleeping on the ground for weeks and hardly noticed it. Very soon he fell asleep, though even in his dreams he went on wondering what had happened to Bree and Aravis and Gwyn. He was wakened suddenly by a noise he had never heard before. "Perhaps it was only a nightmare," said Shasta to himself. At the same moment he noticed that the cat had gone from his back, and he wished it hadn't. But he lay quite still without even opening his eyes, because he felt sure he would be more frightened if he sat up and looked round at the tombs and loneliness, just as you and I might lay still with the clothes over our heads. But then the noise came again, a harsh, piercing cry from behind him out of the desert. Then of course he had to open his eyes and sit up. The moon was shining brightly. The tombs, far bigger and nearer than he had any thought they would be, looked gray in the moonlight. In fact, they looked horribly like huge people, draped in gray robes that covered their heads and faces. They were not at all nice things to have near you when spending a night alone in a strange place. But the noise had come from the opposite side, from the desert. Shasta had to turn his back on the tombs, he didn't like that much, and stare out across the level sand. The wild cry rang out again. "I hope it's not more lions," thought Shasta. It was in fact not very like the lion's roars he had heard on the night when they met Gwyn and Erebus, and was really the cry of a jackal. But of course Shasta did not know this. Even if he had known, he would not have wanted very much to meet a jackal. The cries rang out again and again. "There's more than one of them wherever they are, whatever they are," thought Shasta, "and they're coming nearer." I suppose that if he had been entirely sensible, he would have gone back through the tombs nearer to the river where there were houses, and wild beasts would be less likely to come. But then there were, or he thought there were, the ghouls. To go back through the tombs would mean going through those dark openings in the tombs, and what might come out of them? It may have been silly, but Shasta felt he had rather risk the wild beasts. Then, as the cries came nearer and nearer, he began to change his mind. He was just going to run for it, when suddenly, between him and the desert, a huge animal bounded into view. As the moon was behind it, it looked quite black, and Shasta did not know what it was, except that it had a very big, shaggy head, and went on four legs.
It did not seem to have noticed Shasta, for it had suddenly stopped, turned its head toward the desert, and let out a roar which re-echoed through the tombs and seemed to shake the sand under Shasta's feet. The cries of the other creatures suddenly stopped, and he thought he could hear feet scampering away. Then the great beast turned to examine Shasta. "It's a lion. I know it's a lion," thought Shasta. "I'm done. I wonder, will it hurt much? I wish it was over. I wonder, does anything happen to people after they're dead? Oh, here it comes!" And he shut his eyes and his teeth tight. But instead of teeth and claws, he only felt something warm lying down at his feet. And when he opened his eyes, he said, "Why, it's not nearly as big as I thought. It's only half the size. No, it isn't even the quarter the size. I do declare it's only the cat. I must have dreamed all that about its being as big as a horse." And whether he really had been dreaming or no, what was now lying at his feet and staring him out of countenance, with its big green unwinking eyes, was the cat, though certainly one of the largest cats he had ever seen. "Oh, Puss," gasped Shasta, "I am so glad to see you again. I've been having such horrible dreams." And he at once lay down again, back to back with the cat, as they had been at the beginning of the night. The warmth from it spread all over him. "I'll never do anything nasty to a cat again as long as I live," said Shasta, half to the cat and half to himself. "I did once, you know. I threw stones at a half-starved, mangy old stray." "Hey, stop that!" For the cat had turned round and given him a scratch. "None of that," said Shasta. "It isn't as if you could understand what I'm saying." Then he dozed off. Next morning, when he woke, the cat was gone, the sun was already up, and the sand hot. Shasta, very thirsty, sat up and rubbed his eyes. The desert was blindingly white, and though there was a murmur of noises from the city behind him, where he sat everything was perfectly still. When he looked a little left and west, so that the sun was not in his eyes, he could see the mountains on the far side of the desert, so sharp and clear that they looked only a stone's throw away. He particularly noticed one blue height that divided into two peaks at the top and decided that it must be Mount Pyre. "That's our direction, judging by what the raven said," he thought. "So I'll just make sure of it so as not to waste any time when the others turn up." So he made a good, deep, straight furrow with his foot, pointing exactly to Mount Pyre. The next job, clearly, was to get something to eat and drink. Shasta trotted back through the tombs. They looked quite ordinary now, and he wondered how he could ever have been afraid of them, and down into the cultivated land by the river's side. There were a few people about, but not very many, for the city gates had been open several hours, and the early morning crowd had already gone in. So he had no difficulty in doing a little raiding, as Bree called it. It involved a climb over a garden wall, and the results were three oranges, a melon, a fig or two, and a pomegranate. After that he went down to the river bank, but not too near the bridge, and had a drink. The water was so nice that he took off his hot, dirty clothes and had a dip, for of course Shasta, having lived on the shore all his life, had learned to swim almost as soon as he had learned to walk. When he came out he lay on the grass looking across the water at Tashbaan, all the splendor and strength and glory in it. But that made him remember the dangers of it too. He suddenly realized that the others might have reached the tombs while he was bathing, and gone on without me as likely as not.
So he dressed in a fright and tore back at such a speed that he was all hot and thirsty when he arrived, and so the good of his bath was gone. Like most days when you are alone and waiting for something, this day seemed about 100 hours long. He had plenty to think of course, but sitting alone, just thinking, is pretty slow. He thought a good deal about the Narnians, and especially about Corin. He wondered what had happened when they discovered that the boy who had been lying on the sofa and hearing all their secret plans wasn't really Corin at all. It was very unpleasant to think of all those nice people imagining him as a traitor. But as the sun slowly, slowly climbed up to the top of the sky and then slowly, slowly began going downwards to the west, and no one came and nothing at all happened, he began to get more and more anxious. And of course, he now realized that when they arranged to wait for one another at the tombs, no one had said anything about how long. He couldn't wait here for the rest of his life, and soon it would be dark again, and he would have another night just like last night. A dozen different plans went through his head, all wretched ones, and at last he fixed on the worst plan of all. He decided to wait till it was dark and then go back to the river and steal as many melons as he could carry and set out for Mount Pyre alone, trusting for his direction to the line he had drawn that morning in the sand. It was a crazy idea, and if he had read as many books as you have about journeys over deserts, he would never have dreamed of it. But Shasta had read no books at all. But before the sun set, something did happen. Shasta was sitting in the shadow of one of the tombs, when he saw up and saw two horses coming towards him. Then his heart gave a great leap, for he recognized them as Bree and Hwyn. But next morning his heart But next moment his heart went down into his toes again. There was no sign of Aravis. The horses were being led by a strange man, an armed man, pretty handsomely dressed like an upper slave in a great family. Bree and Win were no longer got up like pack horses, but saddled and bridled. And what could it all mean? It's a trap, thought Shasta. Somebody's caught Aravis, and perhaps they've tortured her and she's given the whole thing away. They want me to jump out and run up and speak to Bree, and then I'll be caught too. And yet, if I don't, I may be losing my only chance to meet the others. Oh, I do wish I knew what had happened. And he skulked behind the tomb, looking out every few minutes and wondering which was the least dangerous thing to do. That concludes chapter 6, and I believe, as custom, if well, we'll work on a custom, but I think 3 chapters in a single sitting is pretty good for now. Besides, I like to leave you guys on a cliffhanger, so that way you come back tomorrow. We'll leave it for here for tonight, and we'll pick up, like I said, hopefully tomorrow, and we'll read some more. I hope that you've been enjoying this so far, and as much as I have at least. I am sorry for some of the times that I do trip over some of the words. Sometimes my eye tracks on the wrong line. I hope it's not too noticeable, but if it wasn't noticeable, then I've given it away. But, I own up to my mistakes when I see them because, well, it's only the right thing to do. Make sure you guys hydrate real quick. No BRB screen for that because I'm about to end anyway. Yeah, I read 3 chapters already. I read chapters 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 6 was a little shorter than the others, but yeah, that was 3 chapters. So, um, yeah. Wow, it's already been an hour and 14 minutes. Wow, that's crazy.
Doesn't feel like it. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me again for Story Time. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I hope that the story is fun. I hope that I'm fun. I hope that you like the way I've been reading it, that you like the voices I've been using, the silly little accents I've been doing. Um, and yeah, I'm having fun with this. I know for some of you, you're dropping in at book three of a series, so it's kind of like skipping the Stardust Crusaders, but um, it's that it is what it is. I've read the first two chronological ones already, so I can't really go back. I mean, I can, but that'll probably be at a later time if you guys really want like completion for the Narnia series. Otherwise, if you guys are just enjoying just dropping in on whatever I happen to read and kind of podcasting this, using this for background noise for whatever you're doing, or using me as a sleep aid. I don't know. I know that you know it happens that it's something that people fall asleep to. So hey, whatever you use it for, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for VODing this if you're watching it on a VOD. Um, Look at me talking like I know what I'm doing, or that I'm like I'm anyone of any repute, or like I'm some sort of established streamer. Jesus, somebody's getting a little ambitious, huh? But I guess that just means that I already have a bit of that stage awareness. So that means when I start trying for real, uh, I don't know if I'm ever gonna try for real. I'm just saying things at this point. I'm just kind of yammering on because I don't really want to say goodbye yet, but you know, I mean, oh shit, come on. Sending me Aka Supers. Come on now, don't be silly. Uh, no, but you guys really are fun to read too. I don't think I've said it on a stream, on a recording, but I have been languishing for years to get back into reading, like reading actual physical print media, books and like stuff, something I can hold, something I can look at, something that's not on a screen. Not that there's anything wrong with reading on a screen. We all do it. It's increasingly a part of our daily life, but I miss the tactile feeling of looking at a book and also not straining my eyes from the screen glare. So it feels really nice that I get to do this for you guys because not only does it give you guys some entertainment in the form of an audiobook or something, that you can just use to relax or whatever background noise, but it incentivizes for me to actually go and one, support my local library, two, actually read something, read a book, read things I wouldn't normally, things that aren't short pithy posts or whatever, like read actual stories. And it's really great to be able to do that, and I want to do that as often as I can for everyone. So you being my audience really just, it means so much to me in in a way I can't really articulate with without getting like a little hammy about it. So I won't. Um, yeah, the plan is tomorrow continue this book. There are where did I put it? I put it here. There are a total of 15 chapters. So at the rate we're going, um, we'll have three more streams like this, and we'll finish The Horse and His Boy, which is really funny because I think it took me like only 3 sessions in the unarchived reading to do a study in Scarlet, and I think that's a much longer story. That was like 78 pages at like 8-point font, and this is like okay, no, this is like almost 200 pages. 200? Almost 200 at like 12-point font with illustrations. Okay, I guess it almost evens out actually. Who knew? But yeah, so three more segments, and then we'll finish this story, and either we'll move on to another Sherlock Holmes mystery, or we'll move to the last unicorn. I'll let you guys decide when that time comes, or at least I'll leave it up to you guys to help figure out what you want to hear, and then I'll also decide based on what I just want to read. So, we'll see from there. Um, huh, my eyes have a weird little thing going on right now where it's like crescent moon this way, crescent moon that way. uh, it's kind of funny. Anyway, is there anything else I can ramble about to pad for time? I don't think there is. So, in the interest of not dragging this on too much longer, I guess I'm just gonna go ahead and say thank you for coming by today. Thank you for listening. I hope you're excited for the next section because I am. Um, Make sure to get good noms, hydrate, get good sleeps, and, as always from me, unshrimp yourselves. Take good care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves, be excellent to each other, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. Thank you for being my Rainiacs. Um, Till next time, this is Radiance VA signing off. Have a radiant day. Goodbye.